Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much indeed for coming to the UKIP Gloucestershire Christmas dinner. It's great to see so many of you this evening, and I'm really pleased that we have a representative from every single constituency within the county of Gloucestershire. I think that's really important. And I think now we all know we've got challenging times ahead, but boy, haven't we got it in front of us after last night's vote in the House of Commons. I mean, I always believed that the Tories would kick Brexit into the long grass. It's clear that's going to happen, and it's clear the need for UKIP is greater than ever before. The referendum is being undermined, the will of the people is being undermined, and who's going to do anything about it when Labour, Liberal and Conservative are pretty much saying the same thing, and when we have a Remain Prime Minister. So when people say to you and us, as they did this year in the general election and this year in the local authority elections, what's the point of UKIP? You're all finished, it's not going to happen now and all the rest. Actually, there's never been a greater point or purpose to what we have to do. And when it comes round to the next set of elections, do we believe the people who voted for Leave are going to take it sitting down and accept the MPs that have voted against their very will? What's the point of democracy if that can be subvented in that way? So, we're here now, we've got a new leader, we have a fight ahead of ourselves, and we're here to move forward, to rebuild, to regroup, to defend this country and to promote this country, to protect this country against the likes of Martin Schulz, who's probably going to be the Deputy Prime Minister of Germany in a few weeks, who said, by 2025, whatever the people say, whatever the governments say, we're going to have a United States of Europe with a treasury, an army, a common Prime Minister. We don't want that. We won't accept that. We'll fight against that. And it's never going to happen. We will bring Brexit within this country. So I'd like to welcome this evening David Kurten AM, who is one of 2 Assembly members in the London Assembly for UKIP. Myself and other members, myself and other members of the county first heard David down at Weymouth, I believe. Actually, no, I think it was in Bolton, wasn't it, with you, Stuart? He brought the house down. He was I won't make you blush, by far the best speaker on the day. And also down in Weymouth, I think you were there, Chris, as well. So a great speaker, a great representative, passionate, belief, and with people like David, we can take the fight onto the streets, because believe me, people's opinion will change once they realise they've been sold a pup. Never more so than last night. So let's gird our loins, let's get ready, let's get some money together, and let's get ready to fight and defend and protect this country for our children and our grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, David Kurten.
Thank you so much, Richard. Great. Wonderful, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's so lovely of you to invite me to Gloucester again. I was here earlier in the year to speak at a patrons' lunch here, so it's lovely to come back to the very same room again. And what an incredible year this has been, or a couple of years this has been. This time last year, just before Christmas, I was in Sleaford. Does anyone remember that? There was a by-election in Sleaford and Wycombe, and Paul Nuttall had just been the leader, and we were hoping to win there, and then we were hoping to win in Stoke, and it didn't happen as we'd hoped it would. So it hasn't been the best of years for us as a party. But no one can ever take away from us what happened on the 23rd of June 2016. And I'm sure that's one of the days where everyone, wherever you were in the country, will remember where you were and you'll remember what you're doing. It's one of those moments in history. And I came out in the morning after, and I was in London, and I saw Nigel. I was there on College Green when he was giving his victory speech in front of the cameras, in front of the Houses of Parliament, and that's one of the pictures which will be in the history books 50, 100 years from now, because we fought for the referendum. We got the referendum and we won the referendum, and that's due to you and me and Nigel and thousands of people up and down the length and breadth of the country. And no one will ever take that away from us, whatever they think. Cast your minds back to that day. You might remember, I love to see the results coming in. when there's any kind of election or something. Do you remember the first result to come in? was Gibraltar.
Yeah.
And it was 95%
Yeah,
to remain. And my heart sank, and then Newcastle came in and they voted to remain. My heart sank even further. And then Sunderland came in. And it was 63% to leave the EU. The pound crashed. I'm not a fan of the pound crashing, but that meant that everyone expected at that point, okay, things have changed, we're coming out. And so that was a glorious night. As Richard just said, last night, or the last couple of days, have been the day when Theresa May, along with friends in networks around wherever they are, have started to begin and put in motion the Brexit betrayal. We've got this agreement where we've agreed, without any need to keep full regulatory alignment with the EU for the sake of the Irish border. But the whole point of coming out of the EU is that we control our borders. And if we want to have a soft border, if we want to say to people coming into Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland, we're not going to have a barrier, we're not going to put up a hard border on our side, we can do that. And we've said we'll do that. Every party, UKIP, the Conservative Party, people in the Labour Party, Leavers, Remainers, the EU, the Irish Republic, the Northern Irish Assembly, people, they all say we want a soft border. We've said we can have a soft border. The method is clear. We need one extra line on the customs forms that they already fill in for VAT when people come across the border to say this is what we're bringing in for customs, and then we can have a hard border, we can keep a soft border. But she's given away something which the people voted that we shouldn't give away, to take back control of, which is control of our laws, that we say what happens in our country and that we are not going to follow the directives and regulations and the decisions of the European Commission and the European Parliament and the European Court of Justice anymore. That's what the people voted for, and we will take nothing less from Theresa May and the people in Parliament and the European Union, because we have all the cards in our hands, don't we?
Yes.
People in the European Union, the businesses, know that they export far more to us than we export to the EU. If we went to WTO rules, the figures I hear is that British companies would pay trade tariffs of 5 billion to the EU. EU companies would pay trade tariffs of 12.5 billion to the UK. So, WTO rules are a good deal for us. Let's have it. We don't need to make a bad deal, but that's what's going on. And the media has tried to write us off. The mainstream media, the BBC, Sky, Channel 4, The Guardian, all these people who are working in concert with the establishment in the political parties, the mainstream, legacy, old political parties, who want to impose a top-down statism on this country that the people have said we don't want anymore. They want to keep us in. And that's what they're trying to do. And what they say about UKIP, and they've said for the last year and a half, is, oh, your job's done. Why don't you just go home, leave it to the Conservatives, who aren't really conservative. That's the biggest mind exercise of, the biggest misnomer in politics in the last 100 years. The Conservative Party are not particularly conservative. Yes, there are some good exceptions, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, and David Davies, and so on. But for the vast majority are not. They're an establishment party. So they say to us, go home. Well, we haven't gone home, we're still here. And our purpose is greater and bigger than ever, because as Nigel said before, he can see a Brexit betrayal happening. Now it's taking place and crystallising. And in the last election, millions of people voted for parties they didn't really want to vote for because they were scared of someone else. Millions of people voted for Theresa May because they were scared of Corbyn, because he's a Marxist. It'd be a disaster for the country. But millions of young people voted for Jeremy Corbyn because they don't know anything better, and Theresa May's campaign crashed halfway through and she ended up sounding like a very entitled android robot sort of person. But she still won, but without a majority. But we are still here. We have purpose. We have local elections coming up in May, and we need to get people in every seat, defending the seats that we have and taking control in our government, in our local government again, so we can make these people stand up and know that we're still here, not just in terms of people, but in terms of power in our local elections. The media is writing us off and ignoring us and hoping that we go away, but we will not go away. I'm going to stand in my local area in London. I'm on the London Assembly already, but I'm going to stand in the local elections in my local borough, and I hope all of you here will take up that mantle as well and stand where you are, because people are crying out for an alternative. The millions of people who didn't see us as someone to vote for last time, because of the way they were programmed by the media programming that it was a two-horse race, want us to come back, crying out for the Brexit that they voted for, the 17.4 million. Now it's more like 20, 21 million if you look at the polls. More people than the 52% now support Brexit. Many, many more, and we want to just get on with it and do it and come out and enjoy the freedom and the prosperity that we voted for. So let's go out in May and win in those local elections and use that as a jumping point to go into the next ones and the next ones, and to make sure that we get the Brexit that we voted for. There are many other things that we also have great purpose in. It's not just Brexit. There are other things that people are very concerned about too. And I would put them down to the three things that we still need to talk about, where we are different to all the other parties and where we resonate with the people as a whole in the country who are not in the media political inner London bubble. One of them, of course, is immigration. And the people in the media always present Brexit as just an economic thing. But for so many people, it is about immigration. And that has completely gone out of the discourse and the discussion. But we know here that it does affect every part of everyone's life in every community. And we never said we're not against immigration, but we're against the high, rapid, mass immigration that was started by Tony Blair, continued by Brown, continued by Cameron, and when Theresa May was Home Secretary, and now she's continued it when she's Prime Minister. We've given out, as a country, 2.7 million British citizenships to foreign people who've moved into this country. Now that's more than we've given out than in the entire 280 years preceding 1997, from the time of the Act of Union in 1707 up to then. We're giving out citizenships at an alarming rate, and the rapid mass immigration has increased the population of the country by 6 million or more since 1997 in the last 20 years. And it's created an entirely artificial housing problem, a housing crisis. And even people who don't support Brexit, who may have voted Remain, know that there's a housing problem and know that young people can't get a foot on the housing ladder. Well, when I was young and I left university, it was a long time ago, it was 1993, I can't believe it's such a long time ago. But I moved to London when I left, and I couldn't get my own home because things were expensive then. I could only get a room in a house share. But today, young people leaving university, British young people, sometimes can often only get a bed in a room share, living like they're in a dormitory in their own capital city. There is a huge housing crisis. It's caused by mass immigration. There's no way of getting around it. And the so-called Conservative Party now wants to pave over vast swathes of our beautiful British and English green belt and countryside to make a solution for a crisis that they are culpable, along with the Labour Party, of creating. And we're the only party that speaks honestly about it.
That's right.
Thank you. And we need to keep on speaking honestly about this, because people know that we're the party that speaks common sense and is not afraid to be politically incorrect when political correctness stifles debate and stops people from understanding what people are doing to our country and what people are doing to the people who live in this country, communities and families, and our beautiful countryside as well. So immigration is one thing we still have to talk about, and the effects it has on housing, on education places, on hospital places and so on. The second thing is radical Islam or Islamism. I don't mind what you call it, the effects are the same. And earlier this week, you all saw in the news the report put out by the Quilliam Foundation, which for the first time an establishment group, because they are pretty much an establishment group, has been honest to say that the dreadful scale of the grooming gangs that we know are going on is perpetrated mainly by Pakistani Muslim men. And people have pilloried anyone before who's been honest about that. You had a Labour MP that talked about it. She was kicked out of her job. You had another Labour MP that retweeted, perhaps by mistake, but still did it, that the victims of Rotherham abuse should shut up for the sake of diversity. And she's still a Labour MP. Now shut. It is absolutely disgraceful what the Labour Party is. And they have no solution. And people who are being in positions of power, whether it's in the police, in the political circles, in the media, in the social work, in local councils, have covered this up and have not addressed it. And 1,400 girls we know in Rotherham, white girls almost entirely, were forced into sex slavery gangs. We call them grooming gangs, but they're really sex slavery gangs. 12 to 14-year-old girls. It's been going on for 30 years. And no one is talking about it. Everyone's afraid to talk about it because of political correctness. Well, I don't care about that. I care about our children. And we've got to grab the police by the scruff of the neck and shake out this common purpose political correctness in the policing, in the social work, in any people in these institutionalized areas of power that haven't dealt with the problem, and name these things which are to do with Muslim communities based on radical Islamic or Islamist culture. I don't care the words, whatever you say. You can be less politically correct than that. I don't mind. We've got to deal with it. We've got to talk about it. And the Conservatives aren't going to talk about it. The Labour, part of the problem in many cases. Third thing is cultural Marxism. You've probably heard of this. It's a word that people are starting to use and talk about. It's what's behind political correctness, or even more, to be more correct, something called critical theory that comes from Gramsci and others who were members of the Frankfurt School in the 1920s and 1930s. A group of people that were players in Lenin's Bolshevik revolution moved from Russia to Frankfurt, the Goethe Institute, and set up a program to undermine Western culture because they couldn't see Marxism, economic Marxism, working in the West, in Western Europe, so they instigated cultural Marxism, which was to get into all of the institutions, undermine them, undermine the family, undermine marriage, undermine Christianity, undermine now the very idea of gender and male and female, and we're getting all this kind of ridiculous political correctness coming out at the moment, guidance given to schools saying you shouldn't call children boys and girls. What utter tosh, honestly, isn't it? That's coming from the so-called Conservative Party again. And if it were the Labour Party were in power, it would be twice as worse. Just yesterday, one of our AMs in Wales was effectively suspended from his post. They said, we're not going to call on you or let you speak until you apologise for making comments about transgenderism, that it's ridiculous or something. I don't know exactly the words he used. But there's almost a censorship on free speech on these issues, that unless you agree with what the establishment is doing at the moment, which is seemingly to try to get rid of what they call gendered language and make everything gender neutral in every area of society, then you are not going to be allowed a platform to speak. And they're pushing this particularly on schools, primary schools and preschools. And I know parents all over the country that are sick with worry at the so-called Conservative Party's plans to introduce what they call LGBT inclusive sex and relationship education on primary schools and secondary schools as well, that parents will have no parental opt-out of, and part of this involves them learning that they don't have a gender, they're not boys and girls or male or female, but they decide their gender themselves when they're ready. Well, absolute load of rubbish. It's like 1984, where the Ministry of Love says to the protagonist, Winston, how many fingers am I holding up? He's holding up 2 fingers, and he says, I'm holding up 4 fingers. And unless you admit that I'm holding up 4 fingers, you're going to be put back in your prison cell and beaten. This is the kind of thing that they're pushing on children and everybody today. Everybody knows it's absolutely ridiculous madness, but all of our establishment political parties are pushing it. It's insane. And UKIP is the only party that is going to stand up and say, look, this is 2 fingers. Stand up to this cultural Marxism in the area where we make sure that our children in our schools have a proper scientific education, that they are not damaged as they're brought up as boys and girls, and parents with conservative values, Christian values, traditional values, Jewish values, whatever, are allowed to pass on their values to their children without the state interfering. And that goes along with another thing that they're pushing, which are all these hate crime laws. And everybody hates these things and know it's absolutely ridiculous. Anyone who's offended by anything can go to the police and say, they've offended me, I feel alarm or distress, and then you can get dragged through the courts for months and months, perhaps just for saying you think that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that offends somebody. Or you say, I don't agree with this thing in the Quran, that offends somebody. And then you go, oh, you just tell a joke. You have a bit of a banter. In Nottinghamshire, wolf whistling is apparently a hate crime now. It's a misogynistic hate crime. This is the latest thing they're trying to roll out. So showing an appreciation to the beauty of a woman is apparently hate. There you go. This is what's coming from the establishment at the moment. We just need some normality, and people are exasperated and fed up with what's going on. Yes, we do need to deal with real incitement to violence. Yeah. We do need, of course, to deal with real violence and real nasty things, domestic violence and so on. But just having a bit of banter in the pub, a bit of a joke and a laugh should not be stopped and not be called a hate crime. Because everybody would then be a hate criminal if you do it. And we're the only party, again, that is questioning this and will, in our policy, stop it from happening. We resonate with everybody on a common sense level outside the crazy world of the inner London bubble. So let's get our message out there, because people want us to rise up and be the UKIP that we can be. And I know we can be that. We have immense purpose. Let's go out in May and win. Let's get Brexit. Let's make our freedom and our prosperity happen. Let's get out there and let's do it again. And let's win. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, although I can't actually say that, can I? That's not politically correct.
We don't care about that.
We've had a very wide-ranging debate this evening, for which I thank David very much. Come down on a very cold and wintry night. We've touched on housing, and that's an issue that's close to all of our hearts, as we see new estates going up left, right, and centre. Not for people who live in Gloucestershire, but for people who might want to live in Gloucestershire. And that's not necessarily what the country needs, more and more houses on green fields. We've talked about Brexit. Do you realise that something like 1 million times more people than there are in this room voted for Brexit? So our potential audience, our potential supporters, are 1 million times each of us. So we can go out and recruit some of them. And I think Phil's point, and hopefully the actions that are going to be taken by the new leadership will help us to do that, to build the party up, because we're never going to achieve the kind of Brexit that we want, and that was so eloquently put by the gentleman on the second table here, Phil. We're never going to achieve that while we're withering on the vine. As a party, we've got to build ourselves up again. The reason that we got the referendum in the first place, and the reason we won the referendum, was because the Conservatives were petrified of us. And you know what? They still are. Yes. When you hear the other parties talk, you will realise that they fear that we're a sleeping giant. We have the capacity to change policy, to make other parties change what they do by our presence, by the threat of our presence. And we can only pursue that by remaining strong, saying the right things, getting as much publicity as the broadcasters allow us to have, which is never very much, and the media allow us to have. So we can do it, but we do it by building from the bottom, and by starting off with events like these, with talking to our neighbours, with going on street stalls and those kind of things. We talked about, and in fact I've heard David talk about cultural Marxism 2 or 3 times, and to me that comes down to free speech. Now, as a Brit, I value free speech. I've seen countries where free speech is not allowed. I've read about countries where free speech was physically restrained, and that is a situation that I never want to get into. And I think it's something that we all value and that we must all do everything we can to protect. You know what? he was talking about gender. When I was at school, gender was what French nouns were. Nothing to do with people. People have sex.
Not very often.
We had another question about who we should address, what our policy should be. What we've done in the referendum and since then is we have expressed, and David made this point very clearly on a number of occasions during his speech, we have expressed our support for people whose voices are not being heard. The people who don't want a new estate built on their back garden. The people who don't want to be ruled by an elite in Brussels. And it's those people, the people who appear voiceless, the people who are consulted but never listened to. Those are the people who we need to appeal to. And we can, and there are millions of them. Yeah. And we can do that. That is the thrust of the way that we want to create our new role into the future, beyond Brexit, because it's like a three-act play. Act 1 was the referendum, and we won that, and that was out of the way. Act 2 is going on at the moment, which is the negotiation about coming out. But Act 3 is the kind of country we want to be when we're out. Now, when people ask me what I felt about the referendum, why I was voting leave, the two words I used were freedom and democracy. Because that's what Britain has been about, and that's what I wanted restored to our country. So I was keen on freedom and democracy. And that is those are the building blocks on which we will take the country forward. And we've got to have a positive, optimistic vision of what Britain can be as an independent country. Now, we have different ideas about that. They haven't been put into any kind of framework. But if we were in favour of leaving the EU, we must have been in favour of leaving the EU for positive reasons, because we thought life would be better outside. And so it's very important that we view everything as in the future as being a possibility, a positive future outside the EU. And that's the kind of policy discussion that I hope UKIP will have in the coming months. So finally, once again, I'd like to thank David for coming along. I'm very glad that there's at least one member from each of the 6 Gloucestershire constituencies here. I'm sorry there's only me from the Cotswolds, but never mind. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out this evening and ask you to give your appreciation to David in the normal manner.